Well, season's over for the Sens. It's time to do a little bit of a recap. Let's recap how the 2021 season went for the Sens. We'll go through each month individually, talk about different things that happened in each month and why they were important to the overall success or hindrance of this team over the course of the season. We'll also look at some of the 3 stars, the most disappointing players. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Well, that could have gone a lot worse.
Oh, thank you. Tie the game, go in overtime, lose.
Way to tie up the stick in front. Not.
Oh boy. And just like that, 6-5, the Sens win!
That was just bad. And here we go. They got their dub. Not anymore.
They got a guy with the best name in sports. A guy with the name Brady! And of course, we have to start with the month of January, which was by far the worst month of the season for the Sens. Sens played 9 times in January. They had a record of 1-7-1. They got 3 of a possible 18 points. You want to know why the Sens missed the playoffs? That right there is why. Interestingly enough though, despite how bad it went for the Sens, they actually started the season fairly decently as they picked up a win over the Leafs in the first game of the season and had points in 2 of their first 3 games. Unfortunately, that second game where they got a point against Winnipeg, they dominated that hockey game, carried a lead into the third period, blew it, and lost in overtime. And that third period blown lead and loss started a downward spiral the Sens took forever to get out of. They lost 6 straight games to end the month and were outscored 34-12. After a decent start to the month, the wheels just completely came off. The goaltending couldn't make a save to save their lives, the defense couldn't move the puck to save their lives, and the offense was hit and miss. The Sens had 5 of those 9 games where they failed to score more than 2 goals, and 4 of them they managed just 1. A large chunk of those struggles, which I kind of mentioned, was the Sens defenseman's inability to move the puck. The Sens started the season with Josh Brown, Braden Coburn, and Eric Brandstrom in the lineup. 3 big bodies who don't move the puck particularly well and aren't the most fleet of foot. It hurt the Sens majorly at the beginning of the season, and we saw as those players were slowly transitioned away from, the team started to get better. And speaking of getting better, that brings me to the month of February. Were they great? No! But they were definitely better than they were in January. The Sens play 14 times in the month of February and finished with a record of 6-8. As was a bit of a concern through most of the months, consistency was a major problem for the Sens in the month of February. They lose 5 of their first 6 straight, win 2 straight, lose 2 straight, win 3 straight, and then lose their last game of the month. So it's kind of like lose, win, lose, win, lose. If you want to be a good team, you can't have stretches like that. The reason the Sens missed the playoffs was because they had way too many stretches like that. As inconsistent as the month of February was for the Sens, I actually think this was the month where the tide started to turn a little bit for this team. The Sens are playing some pretty terrible hockey, going to a Saturday afternoon matchup against a Winnipeg Jets team that has absolutely dominated the Sens early in the season. In Winnipeg, I might add, where the Sens have absolutely had their teeth kicked in this season. They play an excellent game in that hockey game. Brady Tkachuk tips home a point shot late in the third period with about 7 seconds left or so, and the Sens get a 2-1 huge win. Then a couple nights later, the Sens play one of their worst first period and a half or 2 periods of hockey of the entire season, fall down 5-1 to the Leafs in the second, claw all the way back to tie it 5-5 in the third. Dadonov scores the OT winner, and the Sens win that hockey game 6-5. I think these 2 wins on back-to-back games completely changed the Sens' entire season. The Sens start the season 2-12-1. Those 2 games started a turnaround that saw the Sens go 21-16-4 down the stretch. I wholeheartedly believe those 2 wins in back-to-back games by playing an excellent game against Winnipeg and pulling it out late, and then coming all the way back against Toronto, completely changed the mindset, completely changed the confidence, and allowed this team to play a lot more free. Now, it didn't immediately translate for the Sens, as they lost their last game in February and 5 of 6 to start the month of March, but you just started to see in March especially, they were starting to climb that hill with a lot more ease. The Sens ended up playing 13 times in the month of March thanks to some COVID issues and finished with a record of 5-5-3. Now, like I said, it wasn't a great start to the month as they were a little inconsistent, losing 5 of their first 6, including a very bad stretch in Edmonton where they were outscored 16-5. But they were able to close out the month with points in 6 straight games, going 3-0-3. And in my opinion, this was the month where everything changed for this hockey team. Yes, they start the month inconsistent, but you started to see them turn it around against every team they play. Except for Edmonton, who the Sens could never figure out all season. But they played excellent hockey against Calgary, although they did all season. They picked up 3 of a possible 4 points against a very good Leafs team that had dominated the Sens, save for that one comeback win. And a Winnipeg team, they beat them a couple times, and Winnipeg had just been dominating them. And even against Vancouver, the Sens had gotten their show absolutely run by a Vancouver team that was up and down to start the season. Well, the Sens played Vancouver twice in the month of March. They were ultra competitive games, but the Sens ultimately ended up losing 3-2 in overtime and 3-2 in a shootout. But after getting badly outplayed in Vancouver and badly outscored, this was a huge step in the right direction and some massive points. And speaking of massive points, that brings me to the month of April, where the Sens had the most points of any month all season long. Now granted, it was only their second best points percentage month of the season because they were way better points percentage-wise in May, but they played more games in April and had more points, as they played 14 times and had a record of 7-7. And as the theme has said all video long, inconsistency was the theme once again, as the Sens go 1-5 to start the month and 6-2 to finish it. Over the course of the season, defensively the Sens started to get better and better, especially once the goaltending started making some saves. Well, cue April. Defensively, the Sens were really starting to come on, and that was evidenced by shutouts in 2 in 3 games. Which for most teams is kind of just like a, yeah, whatever kind of a thing. But a shutout for the Sens is huge. They hadn't had one in over 2 years. And as the season wore on more and more, the train started building more and more speed. And by the end of the month of April, the Sens train was a-rollin'. This team was red hot, was one of the best teams in the division, and looked like a comfortable playoff qualifier, if not for such an ugly start. And that brings me to the final month of the season, where the Sens were practically unbeatable. Whoa, easy now, Sens fan, just relax. That seems a little bit crazy to me. Oh yeah? Does it? Sens played 7 times in the month of May, and they went 4-1-2. They were terrific to end the season, with the exception of that Calgary game where they got absolutely hammered. But that game can be forgiven considering it was on the second night of a back-to-back with travel against a Calgary team that was so desperate for playoff points. Record aside, the way the Sens played in the month of May was by far the most impressive for me. Defensively, they were exceptional, which is saying something considering they played the final 4.5 games without Thomas Chabot and Josh Brown. Now, a lot of that credit has to go to the top 4 because I was just... I couldn't even explain how impressed I was with guys like Mete, Zaitsev, Zub, and Brandstrom down the stretch. But you've got to give some credit to Jacob Bernard-Docker and Alsing as well. They had to play some minutes, and they were good enough when they were in there. It was an excellent way to end the season and should give the Sens young players some huge confidence going into the summer. But while they are confident, they have to be well aware of the fact they've got a lot of work to do. They can't afford to rest on their laurels because come September, things are about to get a whole lot harder. This team won't be sneaking up on anybody anymore. So now that we've looked at each month individually, let's look at some of the reasons why the Sens ended up where they ended up. I mean, the most obvious reason for that was the 2-12-1 start. They started the season atrociously, and they were never able to climb themselves out of that early hole. One of the things that could have helped this team get out of the early hole, but they just couldn't figure it out soon enough, was consistency from game to game. Yes, you expect that from a young team, so it's not overly upsetting, but consistency was a big problem for the Sens game to game this season, and it cost them dearly. What else cost them dearly? In my opinion at least, their early season deployment of players was a big reason the Sens are where they ended up. One of the massive early turning points for this Sens defensive core was taking Josh Brown out of the lineup and putting Artem Zub in. I thought Zuby Dooby Doo came in and really started to calm down and settle down a Sens D-core that was in absolute shambles early on. Then later in the season, the trade deadline rolls around. The Sens move out Eric Branson and Braden Coburn, slide Eric Brandstrom into the top 4, pick up Victor Mete off waivers, put him into the lineup, and the Sens come down the stretch going 10-3-2. So while the defensive core had their issues, the forward core for the most part did not, as the Sens were the only team in the NHL not to be shut out this season. You want to know why the Sens were able to hang around for as long as they did? That might be why. So how was the offense able to be so good? Well, Conor Brown had an 8-game goal-scoring streak. Drake Batherson had a 6-game goal-scoring streak. Tim Stützle had a hat trick in a game. Josh Norris was an unbelievable revelation as a first-line center. There were very few of the Sens forwards who you could say were just not good enough. But it wasn't just the forwards who had great seasons. I mentioned this briefly before, but one of the biggest shocks for me this season, and he's definitely earned the contract extension he got, was Artem Zub. He came in for Josh Brown, the defense really started to turn it around, and he was excellent. And then even behind him, Matt Murray gets hurt, Marcus Hogberg gets hurt, and all of a sudden, Joey Decord and Philip Gustafsson are thrust into the starters' roles. And when they played, before Decord got hurt, of course, they were exceptional as well. Now, Gustafsson was even better than Decord, I thought, but both guys were really good. And speaking of all the excellent play from all of the Sens this season, let's get into a little bit of 3 stars and most disappointing action, shall we? And to build a little bit of suspense, we're going to work in reverse here. The first star of the season, and by far the Sens' best player, was Ottawa Senators forward Brady Tkachuk. What can you say about the guy? Second in the NHL in hits, second in the NHL in shots, first in the NHL in fights, first in the NHL in penalties drawn. The guy was an animal. People keep bringing up Thomas Chabot as a potential future captain for this team, and I love Thomas Chabot, but I don't see how you give it to anybody but Tkachuk. This guy does everything for this hockey team, and quite frankly, on a lot of nights, he's the only reason the Sens have any success. You can almost watch it on a lot of nights. The Sens come out and they're kind of lackadaisical, and Brady Tkachuk grabs them all by the back of their shirt and drags them into the fight. Then when he's done dragging his own team into the fight, he drags the other team out of the fight. Brady Tkachuk is an animal, was terrific this season, and was a worthy and excellent choice as this year's first star. And the second star is another Ottawa Senators forward who had an exceptional year. This guy broke records, led by example, and is a worthy recipient of the second star. So this year's star number 2 for the Ottawa Senators is forward Conor Brown. It's a minor miracle Conor Brown ends up here. At the beginning of the season, I didn't think Conor Brown was going to score a goal at all this year. He had breakaway after breakaway after chance, and for whatever reason, he always figured out a way to miss. Well, all of a sudden the season wears on, Conor Brown gets a little bit of confidence and just gets on fire. He scores goals in 8 straight games and finishes the season with 20. Actually, correction. He scored against the Leafs in the last game of the season and finished with 21. Conor Brown started the season with 6 goals in his first 35 games. He then went 8 straight games with a goal, finished with goals in 4 of his last 5 games, and had 15 goals in his final 21 hockey games. Conor Brown was red hot down the stretch, but it wasn't just his goal scoring. He was exceptional as a veteran playing with Shane Pinto and Tim Stützle coming home, and his penalty kill prowess was terrific. I was excited when the Sens got Conor Brown from Toronto. The beginning of the season, I kind of wavered on that a little, but boy oh boy, over the course of the whole year, Conor Brown was pretty good, and he deserves the 2nd star. I thought this guy had a real solid season, and he's a worthy recipient of the 3rd star, so this year's star number 3 for the Ottawa Senators is forward Josh Norris. I think everybody knew that Josh Norris was going to have a little bit of success with the Sens this season. I don't think anybody thought that Josh Norris, Brady Tkachuk, and Drake Batherson was going to be the Sens' top line, with Norris being the center. The North Division is loaded with centers. Mark Scheifele, Austin Matthews, John Tavares, Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Bo Horvat. The North is loaded. And admittedly, Josh Norris and the Sens had all kinds of troubles with McDavid and Draisaitl, but on the whole, I thought Norris acquitted himself very well as a rookie center in the NHL. Does Josh Norris have a lot of room to grow? Absolutely. But considering this was a rookie season in a really tough division with a lot of exceptional centers, for him to basically be the number 1 center all season long says a lot about where he is, where he could go, and what kind of a season he had. Ultimately, I think that's going to result in him finishing 3rd in Calder voting, and in this case, it resulted in finishing 3rd in 3-star voting for the Sens. So to recap, Josh Norris is Ottawa's 3rd star, Conor Brown is Ottawa's 2nd star, and Brady Tkachuk is star number 1. And that brings me to the most disappointing player. So without further ado, the most disappointing player of the season is Ottawa Senators forward Evgeny Dadonov. Dadonov was brought into Ottawa to be a difference maker for the Sens power play. The only difference he made on the Sens power play was it was a different player on the ice stinking it up on their power play. Dadonov had 0 power play goals and just 1 power play point, and that came in the 3rd game of the season. He went 52 straight games to end the season without a power play point. It was really shocking to me. Dadonov was one of the biggest free agent signings of the summer, came to the Sens and finished 7th in team scoring. I should point out he finished tied for 7th. He was tied with Nick Paul. And there's nothing wrong with Nick Paul. Nick Paul had an exceptional season, but Evgeny Dadonov has no business tying Nick Paul for points in a season. In fact, Colin White couldn't get himself into the lineup at the beginning of the season, played 10 fewer games, and was just 2 points behind. And Chris Tierney, everybody said he was awful this season. He was only 1 point behind him. Even Nikita Zaitsev, who for most of the season couldn't score in anything but an empty net, he was only 3 points behind him. Evgeny Dadonov was nowhere near good enough for the Sens this season, and for that reason, he is this year's most disappointing player of the year. That's it for this one. Hit like if you liked it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, share it with anybody you know, let me know down below. Why are the Sens where they are? Do you agree with what I said? What about the 3 stars? Let me know, and we'll see you next week for another Sens video.